I am Tom Henkenius. I'm the director of FIDM's Bachelor of Arts in Digital Marketing. I'm also the chief content strategist for the strategy consulting firm Thunder. Welcome to the future of retail. This is the second in a series of discussions looking at the future of the design of business. We continue today talking specifically about retail. And I want to start with a couple housekeeping points. We've said and saved some time for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, please submit it via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As they say, operators are standing by. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer as we go, there's also folks there to answer any question you might have, but then we'll address them at the end. We've invited, though, today an incredible panel to join us. Sheryl Marcus has been a retail executive at companies like Sunglasses Hut. She's been an instructor at FIDM for more than 20 years. We look to her as the sort of guru of industry trends when it comes to retail. Michele Zumel is the vice president of the full price division at Guess, overseeing apparel, accessories, as well as footwear. Katherine Longest is the chief of staff to the CEO at Goop. That basically means she's a thought partner to the CEO, who we all know is Gwyneth Paltrow. And then finally today we'll be joined by Tammy Chatkin-Newman, who is the head of the LA office of 24/7, a creative recruiting agency. Before we get to them, though, as we have all times when we've done this, we'll take a step back and discuss why we're here and what we hope to kind of talk about today. Let's just go through some recent headlines from the world of retail. First, of course, we have to start with the bankruptcies. JCPenney, the 118-year-old brand, started in 1902, bankruptcy with plans to close more than 200, almost 250 stores. Then there's Neiman Marcus, which also filed for Chapter 11, and the rumors of a merger between Neiman and Saks. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. The retail space itself is challenged. Malls already trying to reinvent themselves have been closed. They must try and reinvent again. But then there's also retailers like IKEA who are looking to bring a mall store that's worked well for them as a concept in Europe into the US. We'd also be lost without acknowledging the power of e-commerce. Mom and pop shops have shifted to e-commerce to survive. The big beneficiary, of course, from all this has been Amazon. Retailers who've been reluctant to are now flocking to Amazon. And when I think about who's doing well and why, it comes back, I think, to two things. First, knowing your brand, and second, investing in technology. I have what I'm calling a tale of two retailers for you. There's a bookstore in Dallas. It's also a bar and a venue to have events. It's called the Wild Detectives. Their previous advertising really established the brand as smart and out of the box, like this one that created fake headlines based on the subject of classic literature. They called it lit bait, like clickbait, but lit bait. When you clicked on the bait, it took you to a blog post with the entire text of the book that you could actually read online. After the lockdown, the Wild Detectives launched a new website. It looks just like a regular travel website, but when you search for a destination, instead of pulling up flights, it pulls up books. So here's what you got if you went to travel to Havana. You'd find 2 books about life in Cuba. Within the first few weeks after launching this, they got more than 30,000 unique visitors to their site. Sales upwards of 200% of normal for this time of year. So that's how one retailer survives, really understanding who their brand is, leaning in on technology. Now the second retailer, the second story, if you will, is one I won't tell you the name of first. I'll just give you the backstory. In 2013, hackers stole millions of credit card records from them. You and I were probably one of them. And like any data breach, killed their reputation, it hurt their sales. So they spent a couple years beefing up online security. Then in 2017, they bought 2 companies, one that manages supply chain and delivery, and the other is specifically a delivery platform that allows them to make same-day deliveries. All of this investment in e-commerce allowed Target to see over 100% growth in digital, and in March, Target saw same-store sales surge 20%. Similar to the Wild Detectives, Target knows who they are as a company, they know who they are as a brand, they have leaned in on technology while others have not, and that is sort of the point here. These retailers are not the norm. COVID-19 has sent retail into a tailspin, and that's where I want to start this afternoon. Sheryl Marcus, as I mentioned before, is our retail trends guru at FIDM. She's the first person I want to talk with about all that she's seeing, and specifically, Sheryl, asking you what you've seen and what data and analytics you're paying attention to.
Okay, sorry guys, I'm here. One of the things that's been so frustrating in coming up with the script is how quickly everything has changed. And you talked about JCPenney's. Amazon has indicated that they may be interested in JCPenney's acquisition. In addition, because of some of the stores that have closed, it has given Macy's potentially some breath. In addition to the billionaire who has taken over 5% of their stock, there's about $10 billion worth of sales that are up for grabs. So what we really have to consider in this scenario is what the next normal transition is going to look like, with tremendous consideration to what the relationship will look like between the brand, retailer, and the consumer. Statistics have shown us that the March retail trend down by 8.7% was the largest since 1992. And while the prediction for April was 12%, the actual number was a devastating 16.4%. We know that anywhere from 45 to 50% of consumers are spending more online, with e-commerce sales up 49% in April, which was actually, not surprisingly, led by online groceries. Total retail sales represented by e-commerce in 2019 were about 16% of the total. And the best case scenario has e-commerce penetration to total retail sales reaching the predicted 20 to 25% much sooner than originally forecasted pre-virus. Target through April had digital sales up 275% year over year, and wisely positioned themselves with the acquisition of Shipt. A recent NRF poll had more than 1/2 of consumers, or about 52%, having ordered items online that they normally would have bought in a store. So as we look forward, let's take a look at some of the major trends that have been shaped by the pandemic.
So Sheryl, what I'm hearing from you is that online sales before this were a fraction of total sales. And now we're thinking in 2020, up to a quarter of our shopping will be conducted online. And I would assume that that means that brands need to spend more, like you just mentioned, Target, on technology so they can drive those sales.
Absolutely. Some examples across the supply chain in the business of fashion include buyers that are buying from virtual showrooms, therefore saving on travel, digitally produced samples and campaigns inclusive of 3D, thereby reducing waste. Virtual fashion shows, which have no plan to resume anytime before September, but we as consumers are thrilled to see the inside of the homes of designers and models. Virtual appointments for styling, hair, resale include Real, David's Bridal, where you could set up an appointment virtually to get your wedding dress, and Suit Supply is initiated the same thing. Maybelline launched virtual makeup tools, virtual events such as annual, warehouse, or seasonal sample sales, which allow for a broader assortment, lower overhead, and more customer insight. In fact, NYX, which is a Canadian company selling intimates, did more volume virtually than they did last year in actual physical space. And lastly, we've heard so much about telemedicine being at the forefront with increased use of virtual doctor's appointments, and CVS now offers online health consultations.
Which is also fascinating, and it makes you wonder then, how do we translate this into the brick and mortar experience?
Well, stores that, there's no question that if omni-channel isn't something that a retailer has invested in before, it is the #1 financial investment. Stores like Bed Bath & Beyond have invested $250 million towards omni-channel store experience. Their digital sales in the month of April were up 90%. There are also many other retailers, including Macy's, Ulta, Target, that have done buy online, pick up in store, click and collect, curbside delivery. All three are growing exponentially due to the virus, and I see that continuing just because of convenience. Giant Eagle has launched its first completely contactless store, and even U-Haul has instituted touchless automation.
It's so clear that everybody is looking for more social distancing, less contact between retailer and the consumer. But are they doing other things? Are there other interesting ways brands using to drive sales?
Well, in the long term, online shopping will get a sustained boost from lifestyle changes being forced on consumers. Brands and retailers have had to accelerate the adoption of digital solutions to attract more customers and create urgency. Some have used countdown clocks for purchases. Dress Barn launched a new mobile app with website features, and Wegmans' mobile app lets shoppers do the scanning with no sales associate interaction at all. There is little question that shopping for essentials based on stay-at-home orders have increased online, including office supplies, fitness, cosmetics, particularly skincare, housewares, home improvement, toys, and hobbies. And they were likely to prevail. To be competitive with the likes of Amazon, there can be no shipping fees, and websites must be on point, rapid, or risk losing customers. Chatbots are now becoming more of a necessity as consumers have greater expectations of their online customer services. Companies like Adidas has grown their efforts beyond digital, and we're now seeing $4.3 billion in online sales this year. An increase in live streaming, some with influencers, is another way e-commerce has proved to be particularly popular as brands seek to entertain bored shoppers. Listening to customers and engaging them is becoming increasingly more important. Brands should also emphasize their digital storefronts and unique online service offerings. And online entertainment is also something that will continue, not to mention the next iteration of the home shopping channel.
Something we're all kind of keeping an eye on. But let's spend a minute more on the emerging technologies. Brands with money certainly seem to be able to lean further into AR, VR, drone delivery, artificial intelligence.
Yep, there's no doubt that artificial intelligence is going to gain a tremendous amount of momentum as a result of the virus. Retailers that have been leading in this effort for quite some time, Amazon, Sephora, Ulta, and Stitch Fix, will be joined by others. In addition, augmented reality saw a spiked increase in use with the like of Nike's app and Air Max Cloud, as well as Semi-Fit AR app developed by ASOS. And Kohl's had a collaboration with Snapchat, providing AR virtual closet for athleisure wear. There has been increased use of autonomous delivery, such as robots, whether it be in the delivery of groceries, helping to manage the store's inventory, cleaning, etc. CVS has used drones for delivery, in which the term last mile has taken on an additional meaning for the consumer.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you talk about that ASOS and Kohl's collaboration. Looking at that video was fascinating to see. When products, though, can arrive at your door within an hour of ordering, do we really start to remove the physical store? Like, is there still a need for it? We have talked, you and I, and around the college for a long time about the death of the mall. But I've always said we're really only buying a small percentage of our food, clothing, et cetera, online. And as you say, it's reaching maybe up to 25% this year. So have we reached that slippery slope for brick and mortar?
Well, I definitely think the slope that is slippery is the fact that, when we talk about experiential retail, it needs to be on steroids as we go forward. Department stores' overall health as a business model appears to be at the end of its life and worst positioned, and that's not a new story. More than half of mall-based stores are expecting to close by the end of 2021, and the term innovate or die has become of critical importance. There is a retail consultant that expects 500 of the 1,000 malls are either going to close or they will be unrecognizable. As you mentioned, IKEA may now be coming into a mall. Short-term warehouse inventory that was previously for retail stores has been reallocated for online purchases. Best Buy and others are now taking appointments for in-store consultations. And NRF, as we see stores beginning to open over this past several days and going forward into the week, has published Operation Open Doors with plexiglass dividers at the POS, social distancing, protective gear, health screening, and occupancy limits. And one of the subsets of retailers that may stand to gain from all of this are off-price, because they may potentially have the best inventory buying environment due to the excess merchandise in department stores. All this really deals with is the health of the financial sheet, the finance sheet of a retailer. Some of the specialty stores that have been able to survive because of the balance sheet, interestingly enough, are Abercrombie and Fitch, the American Eagle brand, and Urban Outfitters.
Which is interesting. We could really dig into that for a while. At the college, obviously, the business side of it is so important for us as well. But in the interest of time, let's focus on what you see growing, what's coming next. It seems like you're saying off-price retailers may benefit in the short, maybe the long run. What else?
Well, in addition to everything I've outlined going forward, there's little doubt that health and wellness, also known as self-care, will grow as a priority. And with gyms closed for the unseeable future, Peloton is all the rage, and sales have actually increased by 66% over 2019. If all of us were really smart on March 20th, we should have been able to forecast what companies would do so well during the pandemic, and have made ourselves tens of thousands of dollars in the stock market. Consumers have learned also that they can live with so much less, particularly apparel. And phrases like capsule wardrobe will be a new slogan. We have learned the difference between needs and wants, and consumers have experienced new stores and new brands, which are likely not to, for consumers not to be quite as loyal as they had been before. Expect to see clean to disinfect, redesigned stores with a priority to protect employees, increased price sensitivity, higher digital engagement, more nesting at home, and also buys and merchandise that are going to arrive in stores much closer to when the customer needs them. Also, there will be redefinition of brand purpose and the ability to get your message out. And I'd really like to close with just some special thanks for all of those retailers and brands and businesses that have given so much during this pandemic. Walmart launched Neighbors Helping Neighbors in partnership with Nextdoor. Zappos joined forces with Crocs, donating 10,000 shoes per day to healthcare workers. And millions of dollars were donated by major brands and retailers such as Ralph Lauren, and not to mention the shift in production for masks, PEE, etc.
It's so interesting, Sheryl. I wish we had a few more minutes right now, but I know we have time at the end, because I want to dig in a little further on that, getting things closer to when you need them. Are you saying Christmas is not going to start in August moving forward?
No, you know what? It's really very interesting, because now with stores shut down, typically you would start getting sweaters, etc.
Right.
In the months of August and September. And I think what this pandemic has taught us is, which I don't know why it took a pandemic to teach us this, is that in order to attract a customer into the store and increase your sell-throughs at regular price, those goods need to be delivered closer to when the customer wants them and is willing to purchase.
Excellent. All right, Sheryl, stay there. We'll be back to you in a few minutes. Health, lifestyle, clearly you're saying those are important. I want to turn our attention then to someone at a specific company that's doing quite well in that health and lifestyle space. Goop. Katherine Longest is Chief of Staff to Gwyneth Paltrow. She's also a new addition to our teaching staff at FIDM, which I'm super excited about. Katherine, what are you seeing as it relates to health and wellness in your sales numbers?
Thank you, Tom. Well, during the first few weeks of the pandemic, consumers were panic buying, stocking up on food and toilet paper. However, in the months since, consumers have settled into their new normal, and behavior has really shifted towards health and wellness. So just in terms of what I've seen in the market, DHL, so the popular shipping company, has reported that e-commerce volume has really reached peak holiday levels, as consumers are primarily shopping for health, wellness, as well as home office supplies, which makes sense. So this makes sense as people are putting a premium on staying healthy. This has resulted in the purchase of items like vitamin C and D to improve the immune system, as well as dietary supplements. In addition, as places like beauty salons, gyms, and restaurants are closed, consumers are recreating these experiences at home. So DHL reported that there have been a significant increase in skincare and customer skincare products for specialized things like acne, hair dyes, which makes sense when your salon's closed, etc.
It's so funny. We talked during a previous episode of this series about the future of digital marketing specifically, and we said that brands should increase their online spend during the economic downturn, advertising more. And actually just last week, another study came out that seems to support the same findings, showing brands that increase paid advertising during every previous downturn increase sales in the short term and brand awareness and equity in the long term. But this downturn occurs at a time when there's so many ways to connect to a customer. So does that give us a new frame for which we have to approach digital marketing?
Yeah. Besides keying into consumer behavior during this time to drive sales, it's also important for companies to engage with their consumers and cultivate a community. You can no longer wait for your customers to come to you either by stumbling into your store or attending an event. You need to go out and engage with them. Even more right now, you have a captive audience, so it's the best time to engage with them. They're at home, they don't have a lot to do, so they're willing to kind of tune in for things they might not have beforehand. So some great examples I've seen of this, Daily Harvest launched their new flatbreads during this time with a number of different social activations which were really timely. They had a bingo night with Neil Patrick Harris, they had a TikTok dance challenge, and then they also asked popular chefs to hack their flatbreads, so adding different ingredients to the existing flatbread and sharing those recipes. In terms of other skincare brands I've seen, Miranda Kerr has been hosting a masterclass on her IG Live, which detailed out her Cora Organics skincare routine. And then the brand sold a masterclass kit so you could follow along while she was explaining it. And then even at Goop, we've shifted our popular In Goop Health Summit online into a weekly format called In Goop Health Sessions, where we're doing a 1-hour wellness session with an expert we admire every Wednesday. These sessions are free to the public, so more accessible than the typical summit. And they also are live, so they give the audience a direct line of communication to the experts.
You make it sound so easy to build a community, just do it digitally. But in these times of social distancing, there's got to be some hurdles to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Brands have had to become very scrappy during these times, but I think some of the lessons learned will carry on post-COVID. For example, you may have noticed that when shopping on e-commerce, that new items are no longer being shot on models. They're not looking as refined as usual. That's because no one can shoot in studios right now. As a result, many brands have turned to user-generated content or using model alternatives such as staff. The result is very organic, relatable content that I'd argue is resonating more with customers at this time. Another hurdle has been paid media. Many brands pulled back spend immediately following the coronavirus because A, it just felt insensitive at the time, and B, there was uncertainty around consumers' appetite to buy. While there still lies uncertainty around the economy and the lasting impact of the pandemic, some brands are starting to dip their toes back into the paid media game and are finding that due to the low competition, media prices are very low right now. This opens up an opportunity to try different things at low risk and identify channels that perhaps you weren't previously finding any incremental value and really testing that out. So overall, I think it's an interesting low stakes environment to try new things because no one is expecting the overproduced content and experience that they received pre-COVID.
I love the idea of experimentation just generally, but also in this digital marketing space and especially right now. In fact, before COVID, we'd seen a lot of e-commerce brands experimenting with brick and mortar retail. Goop has even done that. Do you think the fact that a quarter of all sales will be online this year puts another nail in the brick and mortar's proverbial coffin or not?
No. I mean, it's easy to think that, but I think despite the rise in e-commerce, I don't believe brick and mortar is just going to go away. There's a reason why direct-to-consumer brands like Warby Parker and Everlane decide to open brick and mortar, and even Amazon. People like to touch physical product if they can, and if it's a brand they like, they really want to be immersed in it. We as retailers just need to reimagine what that retail experience is like. And just as we engaged our communities virtually during this time, we need to figure out how to do that in person. Personally, one of my favorite brands is Lunya in Santa Monica. They host the best events at their headquarters. I've been to several. I've been to a bachelor watch party, which was co-hosted by a wine company. I saw a smoothie demonstration with a celebrity nutritionist. And as a result, I think it's no coincidence that during this COVID period of time, the only loungewear I'm wearing is Lunya's. The events take place in their showroom. So while I'm waiting around for my smoothie, you're perusing through the merchandise and like feeling the quality and realizing that it's worth that extra price or that premium. However, as we move forward, companies will need to be smarter with their expansion strategies. It no longer feels prudent to dive headfirst into retail when you can see what happened during the pandemic. I think it's important to test the waters first. For Goop, before we opened up our permanent store in San Francisco, we had a pop-up. And our VP of retail even noted, like, on Fillmore, we found that the foot traffic was strong and customers were interested in shopping, attending events, and building a community. So opening the permanent store wasn't a shot in the dark. We had already tested it out with a pop-up beforehand. So I think we'll find that many other brands are going to adopt this testing strategy before really diving into the brick and mortar model.
Yeah, we saw that with a lot of beauty brands back in the day as well. But I hear you saying brick and mortar isn't dead. I also hear you saying the brands need to experiment. So go a little further. What do you see in the future post-COVID?
Sure. This time has been a great period of reflection for brands. We've all had to get really creative, overcome many obstacles, and hopefully figure out a way to make our businesses still work beyond the confines of our traditional business models. Hopefully business leaders are taking this time to listen to their customers and prioritize what truly matters to the customer, as well as the true ethos of the company. As sustainability is something like very important to me, I hope this time honestly gives brands the headspace to think creatively on how to make sustainable goals happen and not just revert to like whatever's cheapest at the time. So I think that it offers like a unique time for people to really take that step back and really have these conversations internally. And we will certainly see big changes in the retail landscape in the next year. And hopefully those positive changes stick once the world returns to normal.
Thank you, Katherine. Super interesting stuff. And Katherine will be back in a few minutes to answer your questions. And don't forget, you can submit those questions just by clicking the Q&A link down below. In the meantime, I'd like to move from Goop, which is a digital-first company that we just talked about, is experimenting and moving into brick and mortar, to Guess, which is a traditional brick and mortar company that has moved obviously into digital in the last several years. Michele Zumel is the vice president of the full price division at Guess. She's a buyer by trade. She's also a buyer by pastime. As a buyer, as you think about your whole career, what is making you buy now?
Well, it's funny. At the beginning of the crisis, and even now, I was forced to find alternatives to my traditional shopping methods. Pre-COVID, my family and I dined out more days than we dined at home. But with restaurants suddenly closed and a family of 4, we quickly and regularly needed a lot more food in the house. But we wanted to be safer at home. So I tried Instacart for the first time in March. And now, 3 months later, I still use it for everything from groceries to wine to replacing my beloved Target runs, sadly. I see this continuing indefinitely now because it's just so convenient. This weekend, we had multiple Instacart deliveries from multiple stores, and really I just left the Apple TV festival to go run down and receive them. Something that hasn't changed in terms of my buying activity is Sephora. Sephora online certainly isn't making me buy now, but I have not slowed down spending there at all because of the crisis. Outside of Amazon, they're truly the fastest that I've experienced and an easy way to achieve instant shopping gratification. Besides, in a time of endless Zoom calls and always needing to be camera ready, who doesn't need a little extra lipstick and powder? Outside of the plethora of face masks I've been purchasing from designers and collabs and the like, there's only one retailer that actually made me buy something that I otherwise wouldn't have, and it was Nordstrom. They sent me a Nordy note for $20 to spend with no restrictions and no limitations. Seemed like a good idea at the time to find a cheap sweater to buy to wear on my evening walks around the block. I felt so smart that I had found a cute sweater for $34. I would only have to pay $14 for it. It was basically free. Never mind their cost and their markup and all the retail 101 stuff that should have been floating in my mind. I was so proud of myself with that $14 deal. I bought it right away. I received that sweater weeks ago, and I have to tell you, it's been folded on a shelf in my closet ever since. That's not Nordstrom for actually moving my hand and making me buy, because it was something I didn't need and I wasn't looking for, but that free $20 somehow spoke to me.
I should also point out, good place when you mentioned that your knowledge of buying, that you are a FIDM grad as well. And if you're any indication of just the regular population, retailers are certainly still selling. They're just selling less, maybe offering big discounts to make that sale happen. And now that things are starting to reopen, guesses, not just in LA, but all over the country, the world, are you starting to see regional differences?
Absolutely. It's sort of what you would think though, right? States that opened quickly, those people came to shop quickly, like Texas and Georgia. The real question is, what will it look like when the initial frenzy is over? How will it level set? I mean, right now, Atlanta is performing better than Texas, Texas better than Arizona, Arizona better than Florida. The real question is, what kind of shopping and traffic pattern will it settle into when we get back to normal? And what happens when the big guns, which will be last to open, New York and California, what will happen when they reopen? Will those people shop with as much vigor, or will they be more cautious? The activity in those big states will have a more meaningful effect on the total and sort of tell us how things will level set going forward.
I just checked on the unemployment rates this morning, 14.5% nationally. They're saying upwards of 20% in California. So related to what you're just saying, you really wonder what that activity might be. I have to assume retailers are bracing for that. But one thing I noticed about a year ago was more websites offering like pay over time options, something we may have called layaway at a point in our history. Also more client services, more one-to-one outreach. Is that where we're at? What's old is new again?
Totally. I mean, that's something, layaway is something I remember as a kid, not to date myself, but I remember Sears and the Roebuck catalog, and layaway was a real thing. In the old days, 60s and 70s, when it was its peak of popularity, layaway, you put down a small deposit and the store would hold that item for you until you paid it in full. Now, semantics and making it more romantic, we're calling it buy now, pay later. So stores like West Elm, which is what you would expect because they sell high ticket furniture, they're doing buy now, pay later. They've teamed up with a third-party payment platform called Affirm to allow customers to pay over time. Obviously, I think it is dependent on your credit rating, whether you pay 0% or a little percent. But either way, you get that initial instant gratification while you're paying over time for your large purchase. But even ModCloth, which is a clothing retailer, has a program called Klarna, Pay Later in 4, and it does the same thing, but on regular ticket items. So that's $34 sweater I bought, I could have put down 25%, and every 2 weeks they would have deducted another 25%, but it would have been mine instantly, and then I would have had it paid in 4 payments. And ModCloth reported a 20% increase in women's clothing spend as a result, so that was smart. In terms of clienteling, virtual selling is the new way to engage with customers on a more personal and direct level. Client apps allow store employees to focus on top purchasers, past purchases, and preferences to prepare for and kick off the conversation. Virtual selling appointments can be scheduled and conducted via Zoom calls and may include showing product on hangers or even on a model, probably a sales associate, and sharing product knowledge. Charge sends can be rung up at a store that isn't even open and sent to customers real time. And incentives such as additional points for loyalty members or a nominal discount can be offered. Curbside pickup can even be executed as the final no contact social distancing step.
It's so fascinating, that level of service, though. I mean, we see people wandering around the stores with the apps now and with the iPads, but it sounds like something that you normally see for the top spending customers. We've also, though, seen some dramatic shifts at the high end of retail. So what you personally like to refer to as the Holy Trinity are each in some financial distress. Was the writing on the wall for all of this bankruptcy that we're seeing?
I mean, sadly, if it was, I missed it, because my Holy Trinity, to explain, is the Barney's, Saks, Neiman's trio, two of which have filed bankruptcy in the past year, one of which has filed twice. That store was an experience, and it was a coming of age, and it was excess, and it was beautiful. So I was dazzled by, I'm a buyer. So I was dazzled by their product and their windows and their customer service. I didn't notice that traffic was deteriorating and that sales were slipping. So yeah, the truth is the luxury model stopped working a while ago. The priorities and spending power of their core client, the boomers, was replaced with their children's, otherwise known as millennials, and their fast fashion proclivities. Adding insult to injury are the designer brands themselves, which were loyal and found exclusively in these big box stores, now found success on their own sites, as well as luxury retailers such as Farfetch and Matches Fashion, quite often for less money. So they were exposing some of the markup or price gouging that was happening in the luxury retailers. And transparency can be a dangerous thing.
It's so interesting when you think about the different shopping habits of generations. Let's think that Barney's of the world didn't adjust to that. And it leads to, I think, what would be a pretty simple question. I'm wondering how simple the answer is, how a brand, like, for example, Guess, for which you work, how does a brand survive then, navigating all this?
That's a loaded question. In order for a brand to survive, it has to have a reason for being. It has to have roots and wings. Maybe it has iconic imagery and marketing that endear you to it for over a span of 40 years, but that isn't enough. It should absolutely have quality that you can count on versus fast, trash fashion. It must have visionary leadership and steadfast management that the entire fleet believes in and follows willingly. A global footprint and diverse product offering is also key. And the brand has to be strong enough to withstand the storm, but nimble enough to change with the times and never lose sight of its true purpose, the customer.
And that's the magic right there. If you look at any company now in bankruptcy, you can find some combination of being over leveraged, losing sight of their target customer, their brand identity, JCPenney, J. Crew, Sears. Anyway, what's next? What happens in the post-COVID world now?
I don't know what the future looks like. If I could predict that, I'd probably have a different job, but I cannot wait to find out. I believe that only the strongest brands will survive the crisis, but that new, exciting ones will emerge. The industry will continue to evolve and experiment, your word, and also elevate, as the customer dollar will be more precious than ever. I see sustainability and eco-consciousness growing in importance exponentially, and I hope that our renewed focus on humanity and charity will continue to be a focus well into the future.
It's so nice to hear both you and Katherine speaking about the same thing, about this humanity, charity. We will come back to you to answer some questions. I see there's already some coming in with you, Michele, shortly. But until then, let's chat with Tammy Chatkin-Newman. She's the head of the LA office of 24/7, which is a creative recruiting agency. They release some really incredible reports, actually, on the status of work and the creative industries. They have a salary calculator for those of you who are looking for work. Tons of stuff, all excellent on their website. Tammy, nice to see you pop up. Let's start with this question for the job searcher. What should they be doing right now? What should they be thinking about?
Well, one of the things we have right now, Tom, which is unique, never before, is time. And that really can be looked at as an opportunity. We should be investigating, learning, and improving our skills. And as we're talking about retail specifically right now, we're obviously, as everyone's been talking about, we're seeing a huge shift in how we're interacting with our customers. It's how we inventory and how we plan right now. Do we have a traditional brick and mortar background? Do you have experience in social and digital? What we're seeing right now is a huge shift in priority with a focus on digital.
I have heard you refer to this as reskilling and upskilling, which I certainly think is so key. We all have to keep updated on our skills, especially in a world that's changing so rapidly. But are there certain skills that you are seeing listed, say, in job listings and job posts that people should be paying attention to?
Absolutely. Everything right now is digital. The focus for retail is on e-commerce business. Companies are looking for people who are innovative, driven, flexible, and quick learners. We're moving away from the days of focusing on one skill set. Some areas we're seeing talent demand include social media, content creation, CRM, data analytics, e-commerce buyers and planners. If you have a traditional brick and mortar background, are you taking advantage of the resources available to learn new skills? Companies are having to make this shift, and it's very prevalent right now.
Which is so interesting because we've long seen this trend in fashion that it is behind the curve when it comes to technology. And that's everything from the manufacturing to the logistics to fulfillment, the marketing, the sales. So we finally at a point where fashion is being forced to innovate.
Absolutely. Fashion has been dramatically impacted by COVID. Supply chain, brick and mortar have all been affected. And this is really putting a huge spotlight on how companies innovate right now, source and the demand of their business models. This pandemic is an accelerator of trends, and that's what we're looking and seeing right now. It's a time of reorganization and innovation for companies from top to bottom, including who companies really employ. When you think about retail, it's not just about fashion, though. We're seeing many sectors, again, wellness, tech, food, all having to dramatically innovate right now.
And as more companies announce that they won't return to the office, literally not going back into their brick and mortar business, I'm thinking Facebook, I'm thinking Twitter, you know more will recognize the value in being more flexible about where their people are actually working from. So what does this future of the workplace look like? Are you seeing a trend yet?
Well, yes, for everybody, as we talked about Bed Bath & Beyond earlier, the spike of sales there, but workplaces have had to shift to working from home overnight, literally. Fashion historically was a very late, adoptive of flexibility, and it has really accelerated how we work overnight. Companies are embracing technology and innovation to keep business moving forward. The ones that don't embrace that change will truly not be able to survive. Trends we're seeing include digital styling at big retailers and small companies as well. Virtual makeup try-on, we mentioned Sephora earlier, or apps like YouCam. Companies are really truly reinventing themselves overnight.
Yeah, and we've hit on that AR trend already. It's so interesting. I wonder what that virtual makeup try-on my Snap camera that I can embed in my Zoom screen, what that does, right? Traditionally, we say is a category that does well during a downturn. But if I'm working from home and I can apply the makeup digitally, does that change that? It just makes me wonder, should brands follow the same playbook from, say, the 2008 recession? Are there lessons we can draw from previous downturns, or is this all new?
Well, absolutely. If companies aren't willing to be innovative and pivot, they're probably, again, not going to be able to survive. One example we've seen very prevalently in fashion is masks. Some companies were very quickly able to roll up their sleeves and figure out how to make masks essential for their businesses. Same goes for an employee. To stay marketable, you have to be able to shift with the times. Great talent is still great talent, and it's hard to find. Innovative digital talent is in huge demand right now, and we don't see this changing. In closing, I read over the weekend, Tory Burch had a really great quote I read, and it said, as an industry, we should be questioning how much of everything we make and thinking about what product and the cycle of product means. Less is more. This means everything right now. And I think that says a lot.
It's so interesting. And I mean, you don't even have to read between the lines. It's so on the front with you. Like, it's digital. And I think that's kind of what we've drawn from everybody today. Let me get everybody to flip their cameras back on when they can and will. Of course, you can turn on your or submit more questions down below. But I want to read a question that came in from Hannah. Do you think the increase in e-commerce will lead more brands to producing more sustainably? What I think is so interesting is what she says in the second half of her question, like possibly switching to pre-order or made to order. And I feel like this is everything now. When we've seen the supply chain disruptions from China and et cetera, we need to be able to produce it locally, right? Is that where we're headed?
Well, I'll chime in and then anybody else afterwards. I think there is, no question that there's been a push for Made in America for a very, very long time. I absolutely do see brands, retailers, etc., producing much less product. And I think that is going to be based on what the consumers' demand are. And I think with the use of AI, artificial intelligence, there's also going to be so many forecasting tools. And during this whole pandemic, the data that e-commerce sites have been able to collect about their consumers, if a retailer or an e-commerce site can really take that data and analyze it, you're gonna not have that same need. And fast fashion and that throwaway fashion mentality was becoming pretty, extinct even prior to this, with Forever 21 filing for Chapter 11. So I think you're going to see, as I mentioned, buys that are going to get there much sooner to when the customer is going to purchase it. I think you are going to see a lot of virtual kinds of appointments and styling, which is going to be much more customizable. And the other, of course, buzzword is personalization.
Michele, I wonder if guests, I know you can't tell us what goes on behind closed doors, but is there anything that you can tell us in terms of what guests is thinking about as you look toward this future and more sustainability, which you did mention you guys are looking at?
Yeah, we already have something called Smart Guess, which is eco product. It's in men's and women's apparel now. We'll be talking about it a little bit louder soon, but that's been in our back pocket and important to us for quite a while. The whole personalization and customization thing, I think, is a bit far off, because making here, one-offs will be a little pricey, but love it as an idea. We're there right now, but eco is very dear to our heart, and we've been involved in that for quite some time. You'll see that online even now.
It's interesting. Katherine, a question came in that's related to all this specifically for you. The person asks, what do you think is the most authentic way to convey sustainable initiatives to stakeholders, consumers, and the media?
Sure. So I think the most authentic way is actually believing it. I've seen a lot of articles just talking about greenwashing and brands kind of touting these sustainable initiatives, but not really following them up. I think Everlane got in a little bit of trouble recently on the way they were treating their workforce with furloughs, even though they've touted these very wholesome mission all along. So I think that that's just like the most important thing is this like essential to your business? I think the best example of that is Patagonia. That's the most important thing to them. They believe in the environment, and they do a lot of things that aren't necessarily just revenue generating, but just simply because they believe it's the best thing. And then in terms of how to kind of pitch that to investors, because sometimes it is a little more expensive in the short run, I think you really need to think about the long-term effect on both your brand and how consumers feel about your brand, and what is your lasting impact on the world. And that can be quantified. I'm a numbers person. It might be short-term difficult, but I think in the long term you can always see the benefit.
There's an interesting question in here from Brianna. She says, what are your expectations with digital marketing post-pandemic? Will there still be an increased focus on digital versus brick and mortar? In other words, she's saying, will companies want to turn their primary focus to increasing their in-person sales again, or will they continue to expand their e-commerce presence? Katherine or Michele, do you have a take on that one?
I think in order to be nimble, you have to do both very well. And who knows, this so came out of left field, and it could happen again. There could be another wave, God forbid. And so e-commerce is sort of the shining light in all of this. And I think growing it is a smart thing. We're certainly going to refocus on the customer, but engaging with them in different ways, because I don't think you can completely replace that human connection or even that tactile connection to the product and the overall experience. But e-commerce is outpacing the troop by quite a bit. And now that people have been home and they've had to do more online, myself included, it's so easy. So maybe people will window shop so that they aren't in a fitting room or they aren't in too much connection with other people, but they'll want to see the product, and then maybe they'll go home because they want something new to come from the warehouse versus something that might have been already tried on. So I think it's important to focus on both, but e-commerce is not slowing down. And I think now that we've all had a bigger taste of it, it's just the beginning.
Tammy, I see you nodding, and I wonder, or Catherine, I'll let you jump in after.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a huge uptick for a while. I mean, specifically in the beauty sector, which is a huge part of retailing in, Los Angeles and New York and beauty. But, I had mentioned in one of my things that, when we think of e-commerce, it's not just related to fashion. One of the big upticks during the pandemic has been food e-commerce. When there was a huge shortage of food in the marketplace, a lot of, I want to say these cool brands started really driving their e-commerce. We have numerous clients that were like really kind of had some clunky e-commerce sites, and they're just like really funneled some efforts into that and really have paid off for them. So interesting when you think of like traditional e-commerce, it really touches many different parts of it, and brands that you may be drinking every day, from kombucha to a lot of different things, may be spinning their e-commerce a lot heavier.
Catherine, oh, go for it, Joe.
No, I was listening to, I think it was Neela Montgomery. She had one of the webinars with Matthew Shea from the National Retail Federation. And it was interesting to note that Crate and Barrel's business prior to this pandemic, 50% of their business was e-commerce, which I really thought was staggering. And I know as a consumer, someone who loved to be in the stores, loved the social part of shopping, et cetera, the amount of, the first couple of weeks I was like too nervous to do anything. But then afterwards, it's like, well, Rick needs shoelaces, or this one needs that, or I went onto Crate and Barrel's site because I'm entertaining in my backyard. And so the kinds of things that people are buying, and for me as someone who never shopped e-commerce, as in never, with an occasional thing from Zara, it's definitely become part of my DNA. And there's probably things that I will not go back and purchase in a store. So it is going to grow exponentially.
Well, it's interesting, and this question fits in really well there, because this person, Olivia, writes in and asks about the beauty industry specifically. And Catherine, I wondered if we could push this one toward your direction. She's asking, what's the future of skincare and makeup when you think about product sampling, when you think about people who are cautious now of sanitary practices? And then there was a follow-up question from somebody else related to it that was basically like, how do we transition beauty sales online? Don't people still want to touch and play and sample?
Yeah, definitely. It's something, we always think about at Goop, and how do you get someone over that line of spending quite a bit of money on a beauty product that they've never tried. So I think what becomes really important is sending samples, kind of as the carrot to get people in the door. I think Sephora does a great job of picking samples at the end of your purchase. I think a lot more brands will start to do that. And then also just using UGC of real people using it, much more reviews. You need to show in the review, like, what kind of skin do you have? Like, what are your normal issues? Really kind of painting that picture. There just needs to be more feedback. You can't just tell someone buy this item for $200 because it just won't work that way. You need to either get it in their hands or really paint a good picture of like what that product is used for, maybe show a video of application, I think. And that's where a lot of the influencers also play a huge part in painting that picture.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up influencers. I don't know who would want to take this one, but I'm going to throw it out there and maybe just throw up your hand or unmute yourself. But somebody wrote about the digital landscape and that where do you see influencers fitting into it as we move forward? As you guys know, I'm the director of the bachelor's program in digital marketing. The influencer marketing piece of this has been big to us. We've been tracking this trend for some time, but where does the influencer go now when I can, do I need an influencer? Can I figure it out for myself from the brand? Is my salesperson, to Michelle's point of having this more custom one-to-one interaction, does that become my influencer that's driving my sales? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll take a little stab at it.
Go for it. Thanks, Tammy.
Listen, I think it's the dollars spent at this time in the market are they're just changing. You know, there's a huge dollar spent on TikTok now. I mean, it's the way the dollars are being spent, or the social, the social influencer is in a different vein right now, right? I mean, there's definitely been a couple of reports during the pandemic of a big kind of backlash on, one or two specific influencers that didn't handle themselves well during the pandemic. And I think it just depends on, what that brand is. I don't think there's a downturn in it. I just think it's being spent in different ways and in different forms and outlets. Again, TikTok has been one of the biggest advertisers during the pandemic. I mean, it's, like people with like 45 million followers. I mean, it's just crazy, 2 billion likes. It's, advertising dollars are just being spent differently, and people are resonating in different ways right now. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what we're seeing, and that's what, yeah.
In the interest of time, I just want to do kind of a round robin, one last question that I think is really germane to a lot of people that are probably watching. And that is, how do you stand out in this, what is probably going to be an ongoing challenging job market? What do you do to, as a creative, stand out, as a marketer, as a retailer? So in your space, what is it when you're hiring folks that you're paying the closest attention to? Tammy, you're the expert on this, so I'll let you go first because I'm sure you have the answer closest at hand.
Well, like I think it's an interesting time. I think that's like an hour discussion, but I think it's an interesting time. I think it's people need to be very multi-focused right now. I think they have to have skills in many different ways right now. I think, again, it's good talent is hard to find. And I think that is always resonates true. And I think you have to be just versatile and continue to take step forwards, and you can't be stagnant in this marketplace. That's for sure.
Sheryl, what are your thoughts? What is the key way of selling yourself in this market?
Well, one of the words that you always hear in retail is the word passion. So I know that if I were in a position where I was looking to hire people in a store environment, I would certainly look to, how much they really loved this business, how much they really love working with people and the consumer. And then the other word that has come up, and I think Tammy said it, I said, this is an area based on the pandemic where people need to be very flexible, and they also need to understand that they have a set of skills, maybe from a job that they did before that may or may not exist going forward, but that are translatable to another industry. And that's what I would, really emphasize in talking to people. Don't underestimate yourself and follow up.
Michelle, I'll jump over to you. What are your tips for people looking for work to get your attention right now?
I think both of the other panelists were correct. There are going to be a lot of very qualified people with a lot of experience looking for jobs. And Tammy knows this because she came from here. Here, attitude is everything. So, it's really about your attitude beyond your experience, beyond your technical skills, because you can teach an old dog new tricks. You can't teach someone to have an attitude. And it's really, you can't even put a price on that. So, with fewer jobs available and so many more people to choose from, that's the number one thing, attitude.
Katherine, you get the last word on this.
Awesome. I agree with everything everyone else said. I think being flexible, just being a general athlete is the way I like to think about it, that you can kind of fill in holes where they're needed. And then also being innovative and not afraid to call the business out on ways you can improve. Just sitting at home and plugging away and doing your work every day isn't going to really move the needle. You really need to come in with this attitude that you're going to approach it from fresh eyes and be innovative and be able to improve the business during this time.
You both speak to the same thing about that attitude piece, right? It's so interesting. I can't thank you all enough for this conversation. It was so interesting for me. I hope for our viewers as well. Tammy, Katherine, Sheryl, Michele, appreciate you so much for joining us this afternoon. The college has terrific working relationships with you. Some of you work for us, some of you are alums from us, and some of you just work so well with us. We can't thank you enough for all of that. I did mention that this is part of a series. 2 weeks from today, we're taking on the culture, or rather, we're taking on the future of culture and events. We'll talk with the deputy director of the Broad, the amazing museum in downtown LA. We also have the curator of FIDM's own museum, as well as the founder of one of the top experiential marketing agencies. She's put on some really amazing events. So we'll talk about them and how do you do all of that in this time. We hope you'll join us. And in the meantime, you can of course follow us online for updates and more information about other events that the college puts on. I am throwing my email on the screen in case you have additional questions for me. We plan on continuing the series beyond June 9th. And so if you have ideas for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you as well. This is simply just an exploration of the future, of the design of business. And if you would like to help us figure out how and what it all looks like, please email me. We, of course, always remind you, of course, to stay inspired. Have a great afternoon.